a name to a face. If you'd like to join us, welcome everyone.
Good morning. Thank you.
Absolutely. We're going to start in just a few seconds here. Welcome, Victoria. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Is it Adila?
Yes, actually, that's really good.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Welcome, Adila. Good to have you here. I see Ernie's with us. Thank you, Ernie, for joining us. Teresa, good to see you. I just replied to your email. Exciting news at the Social Security Administration.
Yeah, thank you.
Morning, Caroline. Welcome. Just giving a few minutes so folks can join us. And while we're waiting, if we could have you introduce yourselves in the chat, your name, your organization, your title, and the name of what's going to be the name of your autobiography. If you were to write your autobiography, I'd like to know what are you going to name it? What is going to be your autobiography? The title of your autobiography. If you haven't thought about it, think about it right now as you're entering your name, title, organization, and what are you going to name your autobiography if you ever write one? I'll tell you what mine is. I'm going to write an autobiography and it's going to be called Mom, Dad, You Were Right. That's it. Keep it simple. And that's what the book's going to be all about. If I had just listened to Mom and Dad, right? Everything would have everything I had to know in life I learned in from my parents, not kindergarten. There's already that book, right? Uh But yeah, I think that's going to be my autobiography title. Okay, I see it is 11:02. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Dr. Ben Howdige. I am the founding board chair of the Inland Coalition on Aging. It's my honor, privilege really to lead this meeting here today. But this coalition is made up of so many groups, so many organizations that I wish we had time to introduce everybody. We don't because we have a great presenter today. I'm very excited to have Dr. Espinoza with us today. We'll start the presentation fairly quickly. We don't have time to introduce everybody, but there's probably one person that would love to introduce themselves, or two people that would love to introduce themselves. Maybe you've been here for a few meetings and you haven't introduced yourself yet, or maybe you're new to the group and would like to introduce yourself. Get the word out about your organization. Please, if we could have maybe one or two volunteers, just really quickly answer the questions: name, title, organization, and what's the title of your autobiography? Anybody? Any volunteers? I just want to give that opportunity in case somebody's wanting to introduce themselves. No, that's okay. That's okay. Teresa, I see you're off mute. Did you want to speak? No? Okay.
I can go really quickly.
Yes.
My name's Adila Sabat St. Clair. I'm from Eisenhower Health down in
Hmm.
Rancho Mirage. And I oversee our memory care center here in the desert. We're building a new one, completion hopefully next year. I haven't figured out my title, the title of my biography yet, so I will circle back to that. But thank you
No
for having
worries. Absolutely. Just drop that in the chat again. For those of you that just joined us, we want, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat your name, title, organization that you're with, and if you wrote an autobiography, what would be the name of that autobiography? Go ahead and put that in the chat so we can get to know each other. I just want to remind folks about the coalition's mission statement. It's so important that we reflect on that we always bring it to mind, that everything we do be surrounded, that this mission statement be baked into everything that we do. So I just want to remind folks, as I see some new names here, new faces, welcome, first of all. Second, I want to just let you know that this coalition is made up of hundreds of organizations or partners or coalition members like yourself, professionals who work in the aging space, older adult space, adults with disabilities and caregivers. If that is you, you are welcome. This is the right place for you. If you don't serve those populations, but you're still interested in this topic, you are absolutely welcome also. Our mission at this coalition is to facilitate systems change across networks and developing improved integrated care and service delivery in long-term services and supports. Long-term service and supports refers to those services that support older adults, people with disabilities, and caregivers. So we're very focused on that. We have some goals that we've set. We're working through those and hope to have an amazing update near August, September of everything we've done this year. The vision of this coalition is very simple, but very profound. A community or an inland empire where older adults, adults with disabilities, and caregivers can age well. Isn't that a fantastic goal, vision is to, for all of us, right, to age well. All of us are aging, right? Anybody here not
Definitely.
aging? Great, great. Okay. Well, I am going to transition over to our main presenter today. I'm so excited to have Dr. Espinoza with us. I'm going to let her introduce herself, but this topic of everything that's going on with the budget, the changes and the proposals and everything that's going on in the world, or especially here in the United States with immigration. And we just wanted to bring light to that and how that touches our folks that we serve and what can we do about it, right? So we're very excited to welcome Dr. Espinoza. I'll let her introduce herself, but she's going to share a little bit about her expertise, and hopefully we can take this back to our organizations and see how we can impact our communities that we serve, but also our goals that we have set for this group. So thank you very much again for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Espinoza.
Thank you so much, Dr. Haragi. Again, thank you everyone for having me and caring about this very, very important topic. All right. So a little bit about me. Actually, first, sorry, some things that we're going to be talking about today. So I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. And so 24/7, I am thinking about mental health, the impacts of mental health. So that is going to be a focus for today. I know that we have different types of providers here joining us today, but we will be talking about the various mental health impacts of legal status, different forms of stress that affect folks from young adults, older adults, right? So kind of across the lifespan, as well as how can we offer that support and connection. So hopefully by the end of the hour, these are the three things that you will walk away with. And then a little bit about me. So I was born and raised in El Monte. This is about maybe 20 to 30 minutes away from downtown Los Angeles. Born and raised there. My parents are still there. My parents immigrated from Mexico about 40 years ago, 50 years ago, and made a life in El Monte. And so they are still there. And I always mention this part of my story in these presentations because El Monte is heavily populated by
Hispanic.
Latino undocumented immigrants as well as a lot of undocumented Asian immigrants. And so it is this like beautiful hub of culture and diversity. And unfortunately, it was also heavily impacted during last year's ice raids, and those raids have been ongoing for my hometown. And so, even though I come today to you with an immense amount of privilege as somebody who was born here in the United States, I have firsthandly witnessed, right, my neighborhood, my parents' home be impacted by the very violent ways of immigration raids and ICE. So my parents luckily have some documentation and have some layer of protection, but even they themselves are experiencing fear as well as so many of our family friends. And again, we've really witnessed that specifically in El Monte. I'm also, like I mentioned, a licensed couple and family therapist here in California. I've been practicing for, I think, 14 years now. And my full-time job is that I'm an associate professor at Alliant University. And so I spent most of my days teaching graduate students who are looking to become couple and family therapists. And alongside that, I also do research. Most of my research is actually with the undocumented community. Most of my clinical experience has been working with the undocumented community. And so I'm hoping to bring some of that knowledge to you here today. Okay. So just starting off us off with some statistics and kind of like what we are looking at here in California. So we know that the majority of undocumented folks are from Mexico. However, right, we are seeing an influx of people from the Philippines, China, and India. So a lot of folks from Asia. And I think this is really important because I think that when we think about an undocumented person, we tend to think about a Latinx person. And the undocumented community is so incredibly diverse. And the faces of the undocumented community are ever changing, right? And so we need to be mindful when we have folks kind of coming into our agencies that we're not stereotyping what an undocumented person might look like because we know that they can come from all over the world. We have about 2.2 million US citizens in California who live in a household with at least one undocumented family member. So, again, even if the folks that may not be walking through your door might identify as an undocumented person, they might be living with one, right? They might know somebody. And we know that there is sometimes stress associated by having proximity, right, to an undocumented family member, which we'll talk a little bit more about today. And so again, even if that person is not undocumented, they may be absorbing some of the stress that our undocumented communities are experiencing on a daily basis. As of February 2026, so just a few months ago, there are 2 months ago, there are 6,459 people in ICE detention facilities here in California. And the US Immigration and Customs Enforcement deported at least 8,250 people from California during the first 9 months of 2025. Okay. So as we are, again, seeing these clients, these folks in our agencies, I think that it is very common. It is understandable that when we see them, we kind of see the person in the here and now, right? Again, the socio-political climate is so incredibly stressful. We imagine that undocumented people are kind of like carrying that with them, again, in the here and now and today. And I think that is also helpful to remind providers that yes, the socio-political climate is so incredibly hostile for undocumented people in this moment. And many times they're also carrying trauma and chronic stress from even before arriving to the United States, right? And so we are reminded to kind of look at and assess for potential pre-migration trauma, so trauma that they experienced back in their country of origin. A lot of people come to the United States because they are experiencing extreme poverty, political violence, other types of abuse. And so they're already coming to the United States with these really difficult experiences. And then sometimes, even during the journey to the United States, they're also experiencing traumatic experiences, right? I've worked with so many, specifically women, who have talked about the abuse that they encountered by the coyotes, by the people helping them cross over during that journey. And so they were already coming to my office with all of those experiences, and then coming to the United States, also experiencing discrimination and racism and oppression. And so I'm talking about this because that trauma is compounded, right? So again, we're kind of seeing them in this one point in time, and it's so important for us to remember that most of the time, by the time that they get to you, they've also had all of these other stories that carry, right, so much weight, so much pain, and so much resilience, right? So much strength that they've still been able to walk through our doors despite so many of these terrible experiences. So again, kind of what I want you to walk away with from the slide is to kind of look at folks in this kind of like holistic lens to remember, right, that they might be carrying other types of experiences by the time that they get to us. And then here I want to talk a little bit about what is a mixed status family. So in an earlier slide, I mentioned that millions of people are living with an undocumented person in their household. And a mixed status family is exactly that. It is where one or more member of a family have a different citizenship or immigration status. So a common makeup is families where the parents are undocumented immigrants and the children are US born citizens. It's also common that we see families where one spouse is a US citizen or a lawful permanent resident and the other spouse is undocumented. And so really this can look like families having these various combinations of US citizens, lawful permanent residents. Okay. And here in this pyramid, we're kind of looking at the different layers of vulnerability of impact that happens to an undocumented family. So at the very top of the pyramid, we see family dissolution. So this is usually what we see in the media. This is what we read about in the news, which is family separation, right? We kind of think about it as like worst case scenario. It's what we ultimately want to avoid. And although that is absolutely true, right? It is a terrible thing that could happen to a family. Often we also overlook the other layers of impact that can happen. And these other layers sometimes again go seem invisible, right, to providers because we tend to focus on, well, we just want to keep this family together. We don't want them to separate, but there are so many different things happening underneath, right? So the first layer, as you can see here under family dissolution, is US citizen children being unable to reside in the United States. So many times in mixed status families, the parent who is undocumented has to make a decision about whether or not to take their child with them back to their country of origin because of deportation or fear of deportation, right? And this has various types of impacts on the child. I've heard stories of the child not speaking the language of their country of origin. Again, they've never stepped foot in their country, their parents' country of origin. And so they have a really hard time acclimating back to a culture that they're very unfamiliar with. So that in itself, right, can create its own set of issues. We have the long-term impact of separation or of fear of separation, economic instability. So sometimes when there is a separation due to detention or deportation, either one parent gets detained or deported, or sometimes both parents. And that in itself creates a lot of economic instability for the family. Many times the main financial provider is the one that is detained and deported because so many of these ICE raids are happening at people's jobs, right? So the parent who actually leaves the home to make income is often the parent who is separated from the family. And so now that house becomes a one parent income household or has zero income coming in, right? And again, that economic instability has its own ripple effects. We also see the emotional distress of separation. Obviously, children, families are going to have an emotional response to their loved one being in detention. And even if a family isn't separated, again, I want to highlight the potential of being separated can also have a long-lasting impact and also cause that emotional distress. A short-term impact that we see is, again, that economic instability that's going to impact the family both short-term and long-term. And there's also changes in the family's daily routines that happen if a parent is detained or deported, right? So in families where there is small children, school-age children, even maybe the person who usually drops them off at school changes because that parent isn't around anymore because they are in detention. The parent who puts that child to bed, the parent who does the bedtime routine, the parent who takes them to soccer games, whatever that is, can ultimately change if that parent is detained. And even though those things might seem, kind of low level to us or mundane, we know that children thrive off of routine. And so they really, really become impacted when they have those changes in their day-to-day lives. Again, that emotional distress is there. And then we have fears about family stability. So even again, if the family is kept together, no one is in detention or has been deported, the fear of the possibility of that happening can be really intense for all family members across the board, whether they have documentation or not. And then here, all the way at the bottom, we also see misunderstandings of immigration. And this is really, really common in all of the families that I have worked with. Families, because of their fear, sometimes find it difficult to have conversations around immigration, have difficulty revealing these parts of their identity to providers, and because of that, they are left with a lot of misunderstandings about their rights, about different types of processes, about different types of resources, because they are so scared to access that help. And you can imagine that's obviously very confusing for adults and even more confusing for children because they are not having these conversations with their parent and then end up having to jump to their own conclusions about what it means to be documented, what it means to be undocumented. And then lastly, we see folks even denying their immigrant heritage because they're having so many misunderstandings and fear around immigration and being undocumented. Okay, so what are folks doing with some of these dynamics? So folks are finding ways to cope, right? Again, the undocumented community is so incredibly resilient. They have so many strengths, and so they are finding a way to survive this, right? And so some of the reports that I have heard and that clinicians have heard from the community is that folks will even report trying to drive a newer car because they feel that police are more likely to profile older cars, doing whatever it takes to pass as documented. I have clients who refuse to leave the house in the daytime. So during the daytime, they're only going to and from work, and they don't leave their house past 5 p.m. because they feel that the ICE raids are more likely to occur during the daytime. So they tell me that, they only go grocery shopping at night, that they have avoided attending any types of restaurants. They say, I literally do not leave my house outside going to work. And you can imagine, right, how that impacts a person's quality of life if they are just at home outside of work hours. We do see some families trying to plan, and this is what we encourage, right? We encourage families to plan around the possibility of deportation. I think that this is really difficult for families. They tell me, well, I don't want to curse it. If I say it out loud, it's going to happen. If I start to write things down, it's going to make it more likely to happen. And I have to kind of work through folks and say, like, yes, I understand that that is very scary and you don't want to speak it right to the universe. And by not having these conversations, we cannot prepare. And we actually leave your family in a more vulnerable place if we don't have a plan for your detention, right, or deportation. And so we want to encourage families to have these conversations and to have some sort of plan. And that could look like anything from having phone numbers written down, um, bank names written down, access to certain accounts, etc., just in case a family member is removed and we need access to some of their information and belongings. And again, that lack of conversation is really, really present for our community. Gulbas and Zayas even called it like this cultural script of silence, where emotional distress in citizen children is exacerbated because parents aren't talking to one another about what is happening sociopolitically. And then assessment, again, I know that folks here probably do this in various ways, but just some tips to kind of think about assessment for the undocumented community. Like I said earlier, we want to make sure that we are asking questions about anything that may have happened in the pre-migration phase, in journey phase, and then post-migration. So again, to not assess people in one point of time and to really kind of look at them in this whole picture kind of lens. It's also critical for the provider to initiate a discussion about the client's immigration status and the provider's role in ensuring it will not be disclosed. So here I think we do need to tread lightly. I know that some people find it very overwhelming to kind of have some of those questions asked directly. And I think that there's also a way to kind of like package that to ease some of that anxiety. So for me, again, I am a therapist. And so sometimes what I'll say is I'll be going over my informed consent, I'll be going over limits of confidentiality, and a list a bunch of things that I am not allowed to disclose. I am not allowed to disclose if you tell me that you stole a newspaper from a 7-Eleven. I am not allowed to disclose if you told me that you did something, back in your country of origin. I am not allowed to disclose if you tell me that you're undocumented. That is not something that I can break confidentiality for. And so I kind of took it in there, right, in my list of things that I'm not allowed to disclose to ease the client's anxiety about that. So whether or not the client is undocumented or not, I might tuck that in there so that they just can hear that that is not something that I am allowed to talk to anybody about. Right. So again, depending on folks' roles, depending on how you do assessment, you might want to find a way to cover that and remind them that that is actually not something that we have to report to ICE. Because of people's mistrust in attending and accessing services, we want to hopefully extend the clinical timeline wherever possible so that clients can feel comfortable and allow us to build that trust with them. We know again that because of their vulnerability, this population is prone to mistrusting systems, mistrusting professionals. And so we really want to try and take our time and winning them over, helping us send the message that we are somebody that they can rely on and trust, and then ultimately not report them to the police, report them to ICE. Because again, even though I know that that might seem like, common sense, again, people are fed a lot of misinformation and they jump to conclusions, and so they might view you as somebody that is not trustworthy, as just another cog in the system, and so that trust building is so incredibly important, and we can do that in so many different ways. Anything for me, I can do it. I will try to speak Spanish right away if I know that the person is their first language is Spanish, or I mentioned that I'm a daughter of immigrants. I try to reveal these parts of myself in hopes to show them that I am a safe person. And then, of course, when we can conduct a culturally competent assessment to identify any cultural values that we can incorporate into treatment. Again, above and beyond the undocumented Latinx community, looking at different other types of ethnic groups. How are we making sure that we are incorporating different types of language, different types of religion, cultural values into the treatment that we give folks? Because we know that that's really where we get buy-in and end up kind of keeping them long term. Okay. And now looking specifically at aging while undocumented. So aging while undocumented is going to pose its own unique risks and dynamics. We know that folks who are older, who are working age, right, that undocumented status is linked to low wages. Also working at an old age and not having a lot of protection might lead them without the ability to retire. as well as having limited healthcare access. I have met so many clients who are in their 60s, 70s, and need to keep working because they don't have any way of retiring, are still responsible for family back home in their country of origin, sending money. And so they feel this need to continue working, even though they're at an age where they should be resting and probably retired. Older undocumented adults are also often just overlooked in the research that we do. And so because of this, there's just kind of like these like decades of systemic exclusion. And we are just not as innovative, right, in ways to support older adults. They're not as valued, right, as younger people, as children. I think when, I've worked with children for so many years, and we always think about, well, we invest in children because we want to prevent them from having crises. We want to prevent them from getting worse. We want to prevent them from getting sick. And older adults, I feel like, are often left out of that conversation. What are we doing for older adults who also still bring so much value and worth to our communities? There's also obviously increased risks with aging. They have limited mobility. A lot of the times they cannot travel for care or return home. I worked with so many undocumented people who had, dementia, psychotic disorders, and would get lost on their way to our office. They would get on the bus, they would have short-term memory loss, and never make it to us, right? And so we would kind of like have to find ways to work with the family, get adult protective services involved, to find that support because folks literally couldn't make it because they had so many issues, psychological issues, emotional issues going on. And then again, we also see again that financial insecurity in retirement. And so they're really relying on family for that care and support because they don't have the cushion of retirement at the end. And that can be incredibly stressful for a family system, especially if there are other undocumented family members in that family. Okay. Some other key challenges. We know that those folks are often ineligible for Medicare, many insurance programs due to cost or fear of deportation. They rely on emergency room visits, community clinics, but this often can lead to chronic conditions being untreated. The mental health and emotional impact can look like high levels of anxiety, or what we call in the Latinx community like nervios or somatization. This is really, really quite common in the work that I do, where I have older adults saying, "Well, I'm completely fine. I'm not being affected by the ICE raids. I feel okay. I'm here because my wife wants me to be here." And then when I start asking them, well, okay, tell me about how you've been feeling. And they'll say, oh, well, I do have a lot of headaches. Or, oh, well, I do have loss of appetite. And it doesn't really connect to them that a lot of the mental health impact is actually coming out through their body, right? It's coming out through these somatization types of symptoms. And so that really takes more assessment. It takes more curiosity from the provider because the client might not think that they are internalizing, right, a lot of what is happening, and we have to just remain really curious so that they can start to connect the dots. Okay, well, actually, I did lose my appetite once so and so got detained, or actually, yes, the headaches actually have gotten worse since I started watching the ICE raids on the news, et cetera, whatever that is. And there also might be just unresolved grief from being separated from their family, aging away from their home country. Something common that I hear about aging away from home is the inability to have said goodbye to family back at home. I have so many clients who'll say, I never got to see my mom again. My father died, and I was unable to go to the funeral back at home. And those are things that they carry around for forever, right? This unresolved grief of not being able to see their loved ones one last time. And so again, that will manifest in different ways in terms of the mental health and emotional impact. Okay, some tips for documentation. And so ultimately, we want to do no harm, right? We want to protect our clients. We want to make sure that the notes that we take are honest and ultimately safe, right, for the people that we are serving. And so we want to encourage folks to use as much neutral language as possible. So instead of just straight out saying client is undocumented, can we write client is ineligible for insurance or client is experiencing immigration stressors? Sometimes, even though we are, again, really committed to doing no harm, it can be, we forget, it can be challenging to step away from using some of that language like illegal or over documenting. And so we have to remember to try to be conservative if we really want that beneficence to be the goal. And most of the time, talking to your agencies, talking to your own supervisors about how to document immigration status, what are the rules around your specific agencies, specific funders around documenting immigration status. Because I know that some people don't have to document it at all. And then I know that there is other um, funding that requires you to write down if a person is undocumented for eligibility reasons. Okay. So again, this is just reiterating some of that language that we suggest. So saying something like client presents with anxiety symptoms, possibly related to chronic stressors within the family environment, including fear of separation and safety concerns, making sure documentation is focused on care and not on the client's legal identity. And although reflecting medical necessity is so important, right? Again, for our funders, we want to keep those notes as strength-based as possible. When I'm training all of my students who are becoming therapists, we really try to practice on, okay, how are we reflecting medical necessity in this note? And how are we making sure that we are painting the client in the best light possible? How are we remaining strength-based in our language? Because we never know where these notes end up. Oftentimes they are subpoenaed. Social workers are reading them, different types of third parties, right? Sometimes have access to these notes. And so we want to make sure that they are strength-based and that we are keeping the client's best interest in that documentation. Okay, now we're going to be moving on to talking about resources. So before connecting a client to resources, which is such an important part of working with undocumented people, we want to ask a client what they want. Okay, I think again, because of our own kind of like bias trap, sometimes we assume what is best for the client. We decide for them before even speaking to them. One common assumption about what a client wants is that they actually want to stay in the United States. A lot of providers think that ultimately that's what's best for the client, that that's what the client wants. And sometimes the client says, actually, my goal is to get back home. Actually, it is so stressful to be an undocumented person here in the US that I actually want to go back home and I want to spend the last days of my life in my home country, right? So it's so important for us to be curious, to be client-led, because we cannot assume what the client wants. We cannot assume what is best for them. Once you find out what are the goals of your client, how can we make sure that the resources that we are offering are tailor-based to what they want, right? So once you know what they want, then you can start to look for the resources that are going to be specific to that goal. And then ultimately that reminder that what you think the client needs may not be what they actually need. And here are some ideas for resourcing clients collaboratively. Undocumented people a lot of the time need that legal support, and so it's important that we are connecting them to those legal resources. I think that this one is such an important piece of resourcing, and my experience has been that it is a difficult one to convince clients to access. I have clients who will say, like, yes, I have been curious about talking to an attorney about fixing my papers, but I'm so nervous that once I talk to someone, my name will be on record and I will get deported. So even though, and I'm not an attorney, but even though I believe that that information is like factually false, they cannot get deported for consulting with an attorney because of that misinformation that I spoke about earlier. They really believe that to be true, and so they don't access help. They don't attend the legal clinics. They don't attend the Know Your Rights trainings. They are just so incredibly scared to access anything because they believe that it will lead to deportation. My experience has been that they have been a little bit more open to accessing family support services. I've obviously treated a lot of undocumented people within the hub of mental health. I worked in community mental health for many, many years, and I had a lot of undocumented moms access our services for their children. So that was a really amazing way for me to be linked to them, to then resource them to these other categories. And so my experience has been that they are a little bit more open to accessing family support, especially if it's for their child, right? So if it's like they might not access support directly for them, but a lot of the ways that we end up connecting with an undocumented adult is usually through their citizen child. The adult might not qualify for mental health, might not qualify for other types of services, but because the child qualifies, I will get access to that parent, which has been a really, really incredible way to resource them and to help them. Sometimes undocumented folks just need documentation assistance. Sometimes there's language barriers. Again, there's myths. And so even sitting down to help somebody come up with that family preparedness plan that I spoke about earlier. Okay, how do we lay everything out so that if you do get deported, you have a plan for support? Even making them copies of important documents can be really helpful. Helping a parents come up with a caregiver affidavit is something that can be done. And so really a caregiver affidavit is just saying, if something were to happen to me, I give permission for this person, usually a family member, to pick up my child from school to make medical decisions in the absence of my presence. And then there's employment and worker protection. Again, one of the myths for undocumented people is that they have no rights, that they are not protected, and that is not true. There are so many organizations, worker centers, labor unions, that their whole goal, their whole purpose is to protect undocumented workers. So making sure that we all know that that exists, and if somebody is being abused at their work center, making sure to refer them so that they have that representation and are knowledgeable about what their rights are. And then, of course, as we kind of talk about resourcing, there are barriers to resourcing. I've had stories of clients saying, well, I went to try to apply for this whatever type of service, and the worker started asking me all of these questions, and so I got nervous and I left. Or I don't qualify for this type of insurance. I don't qualify for Medi-Cal anymore. And so they find themselves wanting to get access to different types of resources and help, but can't, right? Because of their legal status. And so where does that leave us is that we as the providers have to get very creative with the referrals that we get. And this can be difficult. This is not an easy job, right? When a client is saying, I need X, Y, and Z, and you cannot find it for them because they don't qualify for a certain type of program. And so it is going to take a little bit of legwork on our behalf to kind of scour the internet talking to other organizations, talking to other providers about how to link those clients to resources. I know one way that has been really helpful for mental health is so the client might not have insurance, they might not have Medi-Cal, anything like that. They can't access support through that way. And so we just look for resources that are completely pro bono. So an example would be that there are therapists that exists that will provide 100% pro bono services. The client doesn't have to pay a dime. The client doesn't have to have insurance, but they will just see that client out of, to be frank, the goodness of their heart, right? They were just committed to kind of like helping that client and provide free therapy. So those types of services exist. We just have to be really creative and committed to finding them because they are there. Here are just some other local resources for the undocumented community. I'm in Los Angeles, so I have an LA hotline here for rapid response networks, where there are so many different types of legal defense and advocacy organizations that, again, do not require any type of insurance. There really are very low requirements for accessing this type of help. And then I mentioned the family preparedness plan, which is something that you can find online. Those tools are free. A book that I recommend if you are working with a family with a small child. All of this is something that is doable without having to qualify for any type of insurance. Okay, just wrapping up here. So I want to make sure I get to your questions. As all of us are kind of moving through this work, I want to remind folks that we are all still very vulnerable and susceptible to having implicit bias. Even though all of us, I think, have really good intentions when we are working with this community, we are also not immune, right, to consuming media, to consuming these mainstream narratives and rhetoric around the undocumented community. And so it's so important that we are holding ourselves accountable in remaining self-reflective. So how are we constantly also examining our own implicit biases about this community? How are we questioning how our belief system is shaped, right, by societal narratives around immigration and race and legality? So constantly asking yourselves, okay, what are my cultural assumptions? What are my privileges? And how is this informing how I am interacting with this person right now? Right? Because again, all of us are products of socialization. We have all been socialized in a world that is racist, homophobic, transphobic, believes people are illegal, etc. And so even though we might not know it, sometimes even unconsciously, right, those biases come out. And so I'm just really kind of here asking folks of how can we challenge some of those biases so that when we're out there interacting with this community, we can do right by them, right? We can remain as open-minded as possible because all of us are being so flooded by these certain images of what an undocumented person is. Okay, so here are just some bias reflection questions that I would like to offer you to think about. How was immigration talked about in my family? If so, what values were communicated? If not, what did that silence communicate, right? What is the immigration story of my own family? What are my beliefs about how a person becomes an immigrant? Do I believe that immigration is merely a choice? What are my experiences using or hearing words like illegal or alien while growing up and today? And what values are associated with these terms? And so many of us, right, providers belong to the ethnic communities that directly affected by the recent ICE raids. And so you all might be serving immigrant populations and at the same time being impacted by everything that is happening. And so I want you to think about how are you going to attend to your own emotional and spiritual well-being so that you can remain present to do the work that you are doing, right? So constantly kind of checking in with yourself on what am I doing that works in terms of my self-care? What am I doing that works to prevent burnout? right? What support do I need from others? I think this is the hardest one for providers is asking for help, right? How do I, if I know that I need support, if I know that this work is really taxing on me, how do I ask for that support? Do I need any support or accommodations from my supervisor, right? And I know that this is really difficult. It's really difficult for providers to like sit down and say, hey, I'm really like struggling with this. But it's also often that we do this for our clients and we tell them, ask for help, advocate for yourself, ask for an extension. And yet it's so difficult, right, for us to do it ourselves. This is my last slide here, and then we can open it up for conversation and questions. But I want to remind people that undocumented folks are not a monolith. Audre Lorde says there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. So just like she says here, undocumented people do not have a single issue life. Like being undocumented isn't the only thing that is stressful for them. There are so many other things that is happening in their lives that we need to be curious about. And even though they are impacted, right, by a lot of stress, that there are also so many strengths and there are so many things that they celebrate that make them a community that is rich, right, and full of joy. There's so many times where I have a session with a client and I assume that they're going to want to talk about immigration. I assume that they're going to want to talk about being undocumented. And then they're telling me stories about these other parts of their lives that they really just needed to share with somebody, right? So again, we fall into that trap of this is the one thing impacting them. This is the one thing that is the most major stressor. And there's all of these other parts of their identities that are important to them and that they want space to discuss or other things that they need support in. And so it's so important for us to kind of remember that they're just not this homogeneous group. There's so much diversity and to not reduce them to the single issue of immigration. Okay. Just a reminder that they are so much more than the hardships that they face. They are resilient, joyful, and live fulfilling lives and are full of so much strength. Okay. That concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. I put my email here in the screen. I'm happy to answer any questions. Sometimes folks will email me to kind of consult about a case or have questions about resourcing clients. So please feel free to email me so that I can further support people. I love to continue having conversations offline. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Espinoza. If we could please give Dr. Espinoza a virtual round of applause. Thank you so much for this timely message, very important message. As we know, the ecological model tells us what happens to the individual is not just what happens to that individual, but what's happening, what the individual affects the family affects the individual affects the family affects the community affects the nation. But what happens at the national level affects the community, the family, the individual. So we see this impacting not just the immigrants, but extended family, friends, colleagues, and coworkers. I know we have experienced that. So this is very timely message. Thank you so much, Dr. Espinoza. Are there any questions from the group? And maybe we can show everybody, Janelle, on the screen so we can see hands up or chat. I'm looking at the chat to see if we have any questions.
Yeah, and if you don't have any questions, just any comments, anything that you maybe have found helpful in working with this community, I welcome all of those comments. Yeah, Victoria.
Hi. One of the things that I focused in on, and so first, thank you very much for the presentation. It was very helpful, something that we deal with in our agency from a different perspective. But one of the things in addressing seniors, because this is what this group is focusing on, I tend to work more with children and families, is not just the separation from their homeland, but as they get older, the distress of not being able to be buried back in their homeland when we talk about mental health. And for a lot of reasons. One, they may not be able to go home. Sometimes it's the cost that sometimes they don't know the logistics of how to do that. But that family tradition of being buried in their home village or town, in the family cemetery, with their family members, their parents, their spouse in so many cases, when they've come here older because they've been widowed, male or female. And so I don't know that we always think about that part of it, the end of life transitions for them when we're working with seniors, particularly in this situation, particularly even when they're citizens. I mean, even if they're no longer here on an undocumented status, but they're here in a documented status, there's still those logistical challenges. And so I think we need to be sensitive to that, because the seniors may not always bring that out to their own family members, to their children, or whoever they're living with or being cared for. And yet it's inside. It's what they're thinking about. It's what they're mourning. It's what they're grieving. They will become sad. They will become depressed. They will become quiet. They won't talk about things. They'll lose some of their joyfulness that they've had when they were younger, and nobody knows why. So I think
Absolutely.
being able to talk to them, help them share what they're feeling about that, helps them and helps the family. So even if the decision is that they're not going to be able to be buried back in their home country or country of origin, being able to talk about it helps both mental and physical health. So that was just one of the thoughts I had as you were talking about that. That's an area that we've seen. We haven't particularly addressed it.
Mm-hmm.
I am personally, because I have a situation for a family member, but not professionally, but it just brought that to the surface for me. So thank you for your presentation, and thank you for helping us be so more aware
Mm-hmm.
of what we need to be doing,
Sure.
supporting.
Yeah, thank you so much, Victoria. I think that was such an important comment, and I'm so glad that you brought that up. And I love what you're saying about even if the family has made a decision, even if there aren't resources to be able to grant that wish, that final wish for that client to be buried back at home or travel back home, how are we opening up space in our offices to have those conversations that are sometimes avoided? Because, like you said, even just having a conversation, opening up a space to have that discussion can alleviate, right, some of that weight that that person is carrying. And I think it also just creates space to be creative on how okay, we can't get you back at home. What can we do here to grant some of these wishes, to bring peace, right, to some of these desires that you still have. So I really, really appreciate that comment and agree with everything that you shared. Thank you for
And give the seniors some control. We so
absolutely.
often take control away thinking we're being helpful. Well, I'll just take care of it. You don't need to worry about it, but they are worrying about it. And now you
Absolutely.
close the door to discussion and giving us. So you, one of your slides, you said, ask them what they need. What are their goals? And we don't do that very often, and particularly end of life situations. So anyway, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Victoria, for sharing. This cuts across all of our subcommittee groups. All of this is applicable to our behavioral health subcommittee group, our housing subcommittee group, our caregiving subcommittee group. So take this back, share it with the rest of the folks in your subcommittees. Hopefully, if you're new, we will invite you to be part of one of our subcommittees. We have 5 subcommittees that are working on our master plan for aging goals. So we invite you to that. We are going to send out the PowerPoint. Thank you again to Dr. Espinoza. Appreciate your time and all that you do for our community. And I just want to remind you, we have our next meeting will be on Tuesday, April 28th, same time, 11 to 12. We have Mia Atruya and Tamika Ferguson from the Riverside Office on Aging presenter. So please join us again then. If you're not a member of the ICA, please use the link to join because that will ensure that you get updates, meetings, trainings, conferences. If you have this meeting on your calendar, you may not be a member. So just keep that in mind. Maybe you just attended a meeting, so now you're on our meeting list, but you may not be an official member. So please go to the ICA website, that's inlandaging.org, and join today. Thank you for all that you do to ensure that we can all age well in the Inland Empire. You have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.